to the cloud. So, good afternoon. I'm here with our Hall Johnson adjudicators for the 2020 NSA competition. I'd like to introduce them, although you have heard some introductions prior at the beginning of our time together. So, first of all, we have Barbara Hill Moore here from Dallas, Texas. She has been teaching at SMU since 1974. And in 1990, she founded Spiritual Voices, an ensemble soloist and pianist specializing in the performance of the earliest composed Negro spirituals. We also have Devonna Rowe, voice instructor at Peabody Institute of Johns Hopkins University. Dr. Rowe gave the world premiere performance of Pulitzer Prize winning composer George Walker's 5 songs for voice and piano. And we also have Everett McCorvey from the University of Kentucky. He has been on this faculty since 1991, and he's founder and director of the American Spiritual Ensemble. So welcome to you today, and I'm so happy that you were able to be with us for the 2020 Hall Johnson competition. We're here to talk with them a little bit about spirituals and their task of adjudicating this year's competition. There are a lot of years of singing and adjudication on this screen. So I'd like to first ask you about your experiences of singing spirituals. Could you tell us a little bit about your recollection of your first experiences of singing, and maybe especially with Hall Johnson arranged spirituals? Whoever would like to go first.
I'll start.
Okay, great.
I remember my mother was a church pianist, choral director, and musician. And so my memory of singing spirituals and hymns began very early. And I guess from birth. And at 3 years old, I stood beside the piano with my mother playing the piano, and I sang my first song, hymn, and a spiritual. So I grew up really just kind of knowing something about the spirituals. I had an opportunity. I could memorize very quickly. Even though I had my songs memorized, I liked the fact that the choir used a book. So I would put a book in front of me, and but I had the words memorized. So I grew up with the spiritual.
What about you, Barbara?
Oh, I could say the very same. My mother was not a trained musician, but she sang in the church choir, and I sang in the church choir. But I was thinking of some of my first experiences with actually performing spirituals were with the Legend Singers, which is a very well-known ensemble run by Kenneth Billups in St. Louis as I was growing up as a child. And I was a high school member, which was a big deal back then, of Legend Singers. They had maybe 4, 1 in each category. And I sat with the sopranos feeling like I was in heaven. And we sang all kinds of music. I can remember spirituals and things like God's trombones and so on. But most importantly in that time for me was that Hall Johnson himself came to St. Louis and did a master class with us because we were preparing a concert of spirituals. And so I won't go on about that right now, but I will share some of his personal thoughts about his songs, because to me it was like having Mozart in the place. You know, I was just a kid, 15 or so, and to think that there was a living Black composer actually talking to me was just something I shall never forget. And now, of course, I feel like he's touching me and my students through that experience.
Oh, how
So I'll
wonderful.
shut up. I could go on. Sorry.
Everett, what about you?
Well, I grew up in Montgomery, Alabama, and I was during the civil rights movement. And my father was a deacon at the church where Ralph Abernathy was the minister. And Ralph Abernathy, of course, was Martin Luther King's assistant. And Martin Luther King lived right around the corner from my house. And so a lot of the iconic photos that you saw, that you see of the civil rights movement with Martin Luther King were taken in my father's church at First Baptist Church because it was a very large building. And Dexter Avenue, where Reverend King preached, was a smaller, much smaller facility. So I heard these great choirs coming through Montgomery in support in solidarity to the civil rights movement. And Tuskegee Institute was 30 miles up the road, and William Dawson was there, and of course working and arranging and just making these amazing arrangements. And so it was really in my whole life blood from a very early age because of the work in the civil rights movement. And Martin Luther King loved spirituals and would quote spirituals in his sermons. And so it was a music that, you know, was really in my blood from a very early age.
Wow, that's so inspiring to hear. In light of the purpose of the Hall Johnson competition, where we are wanting to encourage restoring authenticity to the performance of classically arranged spirituals, could you speak to how performers do this? How do performers maintain authenticity in the performance of spirituals? Maybe could we speak, who would like, Barbara, would you like to start since you knew the man?
Well, he was quite specific about what he wanted with his music. He didn't want you recreating it and gospelizing it, and he was very articulate in saying so. He wanted to really to follow what he wrote, especially in the spirituals he himself he composed, he not just arrangements, and so he was adamant about the simplicity of timbre, that you never forgot the message of the text, and that you kept the voice as a sort of supplement to what the message was and not the other way around. That you didn't get excited about you, but that you got focused on what the message was. And for me, this was just like nothing new because that's kind of the way my mother taught me to sing as a child. You know, it was about what you were saying, and if you really said it with a commitment, people actually felt what you were saying. So
And that crosses over all genre, doesn't it?
Yes.
yes, it
Yes.
does.
Yes, yes. What about you, Devonna?
The kind of zeroing in on the same idea of the message, telling the story is so very important. We are storytellers. We are conveying a message when we perform. And I think with Hall Johnson as well as H.T. Burley, we are experiencing the classics within the spiritual. And one way to keep this alive is to include them on our recitals because they belong there. And this is something that I'm always aware of. It is the spiritual is a significant part of our culture, and you know, to include them with the European music, our German, French, and Italian, as and most of that music these were also folk songs. They're songs of the people telling a story. And so we have to remember the same thing in reference to a story that may be somewhat different, a story that comes from, you know, a twofold in telling a story, but also keeping some of history alive. in each part of African American history, we have to remember that music was so much a part of telling the story of what was going on. If we were talking about the civil rights movement, we can, Oh Freedom, we can name specific songs that were very significant during the history and a particular time in our lives. So to keep these songs alive, to keep them on recitals, to perform them, to help our students to understand the history behind them, and just as with the Hall Johnson competition, to help them to see the significance of the composer, the music, the culture, and the history. It's very important.
Yes. Everett.
Well, that was one of the reasons that I started the American Spiritual Ensemble. When I got out of college and then I started performing in the business, I was noticing that there was a sort of a trend towards gospel music, and some of these spirituals were being lost, and then the ones that were staying were sort of being what I would call gospelized, as Dr. Moore said. And I think that that's something that I wanted to try to create a group that would celebrate these spirituals in this classical form that H.T. Burley started, and celebrate the music and tell the story of these spirituals. They have powerful, powerful stories. And so when I'm working with a student or with the American Spiritual Ensemble, I'm talking about the story even more than I'm talking about the music, because we've got to make sure that they understand the meaning of these songs and the story behind these songs, because it really does help then to understand the culture when you understand the music.
So, so yes, I get that. So when we talk about adjudicating, so talk about what your task was for this year's NSAs. How do you go about determining how authentic and how much of a storyteller these young singers were? So can you speak to that, Everett?
Well, that was something that I was looking for in the competitors. I wanted to see if they could tell the story, and if and how they told the story, if they understood the story, because that's really important. And I wanted to make sure that that was not lost in this competition. And so, as I was listening to because it's amazing. They all had beautiful voices.
Yes.
And so that was not, that made it even more difficult
Check.
because the voices were so beautiful.
Mhm.
And, but I was looking for storytellers.
That's great. What about you, Devonna?
In addition to expression and vocal inflections and how the story was being told, the quality of the tone in possibly emphasizing certain sections, the musicianship, the characteristics, the spiritual, the syncopation within it. How's the voice being used in order to um, uh, express each style? Basically, there's a characteristic, there's something very important within that particular style. How did the student use their voice in that particular style? The coloring within the tonal quality in the expression as they expressed the story was very important to me. So there are many things.
Many aspects, many
Yes,
aspects to tell it storytelling. What about
yes.
you, Barbara?
Well, I I agree with my colleagues. The voices were lovely, and in all cases, really, it um, was interesting to see the interpretations of songs you've known your entire life, how differently they were expressed by each person, what things appeared important to them to say and convey. Um, and of course, for me, I could hear Mr. Johnson's voice saying, I didn't write that. Or I did. And I mean, if you meet somebody and they've written something, and they're specific about wanting it back, you don't want to hear people misinterpret and inaccurately interpret what has been written. And that was important to me. I just could hear his voice. And it was interesting, when he worked with singers individually as well as with our ensemble, he would uh, explain how important rhythm was, how important syncopation is to the storyline, and the energy of a piece. And then he would allow a person to sing to the end, and if they added, for example, at the end, the octave, something that's the same pitch, he would want to know why they felt compelled to do so. And they really had to explain that. I frequently tell my students, well, would you do that to a song written by Mozart or Schubert? Or anybody else for that matter? Would you just add something? Would you just feel compelled to just tag on something?
And improve upon it.
Yeah, what makes you think you already know how to improve something that's lasted throughout, generations? So we were challenged, and we were also challenged by the fact that many students had to use recordings
Yes.
that they were in, uncomfortable and not their normal settings for singing. There were lots of things that compelled us to have empathy and to listen differently. And that's, of course, challenging for us as teachers and adjudicators, as well as performers ourselves. And so it was very challenging and yet very enriching and rewarding to me. I loved it.
Wow. Well, it's been inspiring and rewarding to speak with each of you. And I think that could be a last word to our singers for the future, Hall Johnson. What would Hall Johnson do? Refer to the visit.
Yes.
Well, one thing I would
Did I
love,
write that?
one thing I'd love to add with teachers who are unfamiliar with Hall Johnson's work, I have been in some competitions and they say Hal Johnson, and so Hall.
Okay.
Yeah,
Yes, we
Let's
cleared
start
that
at the
up.
beginning.
that's right.
We cleared that up. Well, thank you once again for serving as adjudicators. I'm sure the students are very happy to hear your perspective. So, and we'll see you on Sunday.
You will.
And so we'll see you also in person soon.
Yeah.
We hope so.
Thank
Thank
you.
you.
Thank you
Thank
very
you.
much.
Thank you.
Thank you, Diana.